I'm going to talk a little bit about something that is very difficult to wrap your head around, which tends to be kind of the whole kind of underlying theme of all my videos. Um, and this is something that is almost around suffering. So sometimes you'll have people who are still kind of new to understanding God and destiny and suffering. They'll say, you know what, like God is omniscient, so he knows everything that's going to happen. Why doesn't he prevent destruction? Like, why put us in the world and then say, I know this is going to happen in the future, but I'm going to let it happen anyway? And it's a difficult question to answer. Like, I have no reference for it other than my own lived experience and my tradition um, from 1400 years onwards, and a little bit of what scripture from that time talks about antiquity. So, there is the first battle that the prophet kind of was engaged in. It's called like a full moon, and it's it's not something that the prophet wanted to engage in. He was actually trying to leave his original hometown because he was being persecuted for his kind of like innovative ideas about the world and the universe. And in leaving, people who were in his hometown or who were persecuting him wanted to almost chase him and almost like eliminate him so that his ideas don't spread. So one of the things that we know is, and you'll in this playlist, like what is meaning, I've kind of almost modified some of the comments to include some of the references to the scripture of the Quran, so that way, if people were a little bit kind of hesitant to kind of delve into it, because like what usually when we think of the Quran, we don't even know what to think. So this is kind of like an inlet, as it were, from like this massive ocean. You can kind of have like a little brook or a creek to kind of understand some of what its contents are, and then from that you can kind of gauge how you want to move on. So I am going to give reference to what I'm talking about, but I'm going to talk about it very broadly. So just to kind of give an understanding about death and suffering and carnage and like all this devastation in the world, and what, as we progress through time, people who look back at history at these can try to understand. So during this time, because the prophet didn't have the intention to actually get into any kind of scrimmage or any kind of um, war, as it is, he was almost aided by God because he was a small number and he was already persecuted. Like him and his followers were a small number. They're already being persecuted for trying to defend their freedom of expression. And they were leaving as though to say, like, we're going to leave you to what you want to believe. We're going to leave and give you the freedom, and we'll try to find our own freedom as well. So the prophet was, prophets are known to have visions or dreams that are true, right? It's kind of like a way of saying that some references in historical narratives in the Quran, when they talk about revelation or people who are inspired, is to say that normal people can be inspired too. So God talks about bees being inspired. He talks about the mother of Moses being inspired. And so it's almost to say, and Mary being inspired. So it's almost to say, sometimes if you're in these difficult positions, if you hear some kind of like, or like a thought comes to your mind and it's fleeting and it kind of goes away right away, some scholars say this is an angel that's giving you some kind of inspiration. And oftentimes, if it's something that is very heavy on your soul and you don't want to do it, it's usually a divine inspiration, because it's usually something that's going to be pioneering something, like some kind of change, and that's it. Like God's kind of chosen you. Like it's an Arabic term that it's almost akin to what prophets are. It's just that there comes a time where God just chooses somebody and he says, for this situation in contemporary history or whatever it is for the time, you're going to have to do this. This is your job, and that's it. And building on what we talked about consciousness and what people sort of pray for, that's sort of what they end up aligning with. Like God just says, like in time and history, this is going to be what happens, and if somebody prays for this, they end up aligning with it, and that becomes their destiny. So there's this point in time where I can't remember if it was previous to the scrimmage, as it were, where it was like one side was almost coming up against the other. And what God can do is, sometimes you say, you know, my eyes play tricks on me or things like that. So God, he can do this if he knows that he's trying to help one group, as it were, because they are being oppressed or they're not being treated fairly. So that is what happened. So the prophet and his companions, they actually saw the opposing group as a very small number, even though they were a very large number. But just imagine what that does to your state of mind. If you're going to go to a gymnasium, for example, and someone's going to say, we're going to practice a play, right? And you kind of have stage fright and you're like, I don't want to. But then you go and it's empty and it's just you and your class and you already know your class, you all play together. It's not a big deal, right? It's just a teacher kind of at the bottom there at the ground. You're on the stage and you're all playing and it's not a big deal. Now, if you go in and the teacher says the same thing, and then you have the entire school standing or like sitting down on the ground waiting to watch your presentation, you're not going to feel the same way. You're going to be a little bit nervous. You're going to be like, you might be scared and you change your mind, you don't want to, your stomach might feel nervous and then you want to go pee, or you just don't want to at all and you just freeze. And these are all very healthy emotions to identify and to know how to deal with, and to not feel scared about expressing, because this is all normal and part of how we kind of understand how to grow out of these emotions and become a little bit more confident. So anyway, the what happened was when this almost perception of the other side looked like it wasn't very much, the believers and the prophet and his companions, they didn't, and I say believers in the sense that they believed in what they were trying to defend. Like they believed that it was important to have freedom of expression. If I feel like people are trying to promote a way of thinking that doesn't make sense to me, and they're almost making me feel like I have to be forced to think the way they think, but it doesn't make sense, then why can't I defend myself and say no? So that's basically why you have these narratives of the prophet and battles and wars and people talking about death and all that. It's just a natural way of saying throughout time, this is what it is. Like your life is about learning, and if anybody tries to take that away from you, know that you have the right to defend yourself. So after they saw these numbers and they're like, oh, I think we can relax, God actually helped them sleep. So he sent this kind of nice rain that helped them feel rested so they could sleep. So you can see how God aligns the universe with people who feel like they were patient for so long, and then it came to a point where like we can't be patient anymore. Like we have to do something, otherwise we are going to die. And one thing you have to do is self-preservation, which means you have to save your life. So that was one thing. So God was helping them in all these little ways, like through the universe. I talked in the past about how God has what he calls in the Quran soldiers. So it's almost like everything in nature belongs to God in the sense that he could use it in any way. Like he can make the wind blow in a certain way that could create a nice breeze if you're feeling really, really hot and you don't want to do anything, but then that breeze comes in and then you feel encouraged again. So that was so far we have that they saw that we don't have to be scared. There's not a lot of people. We might not even have to go to war. Then they felt like we feel rested and it's a nice breeze. Or like this nice mist that helps us feel cool down and refreshed. Whereas the other side, it started to get really muddy and they couldn't move. So you can imagine what this is looking like. And then on top of that, God says, if you throw, like he's talking to the prophet, he says, if I help you and you think of throwing sand, right? If you just throw sand on, like, it's probably not going to go very far, even if you try, right? It's going to go for a little bit, almost like when sometimes it's a really windy day and you're out on the playground, sometimes you'll get a little bit of grit in your eyes and you brush it off and it's not a big deal. But God was saying that sometimes you just have to put the effort. It doesn't really matter what the outcome is. That's up to God. What your intention is I want to defend something that's important and I'm going to put the effort. I'm not just going to assume that, well, God can if he wants to. It's not enough. God says you have to actually try and then I can help you. So that's exactly what happened, was that the prophet, he's like, I wasn't prepared to go to war. I just want to save myself and I want to save my friends. And these people aren't letting me. So on top of that, also, God sent angels to help, because sometimes when people, even kind people or mean people, anybody who actually hurts somebody, even if it means that they have to defend themselves to hurt somebody, they still feel bad. It's never a good feeling. And you always have to feel with this feeling of guilt and remorse and like, was there something I could have done different? And sometimes there isn't. So the reason that God sent these angels was to say, I'm going to use these angels to fight with you. And you're going to know that these angels are the ones that ended up killing these people, is because they're not gonna have a nose. So it's almost like God saying, you never really have to worry if you're defending a worthy cause. If there's something very important that you're trying to defend and you're scared because it's new and people are gonna maybe make fun of you or marginalize you or kind of put you to the side and say you're not popular and try to make mean gossip about you or anything, don't worry. Like it is hurtful, and you have to remind yourself of these stories and say, you know what, I'm not alone in the universe. I know the universe is going to help me, because we have to maintain that balance again, right? So all of these things, if you think of them now, this is just the first battle that the prophet kind of engaged in after he was trying to leave his hometown. Now, bring that back to a current context. If God knows that in the lote tree, so for example, the core of the earth where all the knowledge exists, it's limitless. So it's almost to say, because God is all knowing and he knows when to maneuver certain circumstances in the world to help things remain balanced, it's not that God is saying, I'm going to create this problem in the world, but it's because people choose in a certain way and they learn in a different way, and they have all these ways of being allowed to make mistakes and try to correct their mistakes. I am allowing angels to support them whenever they are trying to align with the universe again. So think of somebody who was born and he had a mom and a dad who used to always wonder, like, before this boy was born, it's really difficult for us to have a baby. Like, we're trying so hard, and some parents and couples, couples before they become parents, they have a really hard time having kids, and it's something that they really, really want, and they see all their friends having kids and moving on with their life, and like they want to wonder, like, it must be for a good reason. Not all kids end up being born healthy, for example. It might be something that we can't afford to help the baby, so maybe we should just be patient and be grateful that, well, at least we have each other to kind of keep each other company and love each other. So sometimes what happens is, if a couple really, really want a baby, they can actually pray and say, God, if you let us have a baby, maybe we will try to help this baby learn something about the universe, to help people understand something about you, or about beneficial knowledge. So to help the world in a certain way. So that's all it is. And then God somehow just kind of helps this couple and helps this baby grow in a way that it's almost like the boy or the baby or the girl, they're still thinking on their own. But if they're starting to think in a way that doesn't align with what their parents wanted for them, even if their parents say, yeah, you can go, and they maybe can't remember the exact specifics of what they wanted their child to become, it was almost like, just follow what you want, and I'm sure, the universe will help you. God will actually put roadblocks where there are like, nope, this is not, you have to do something bigger. And so that kind of frustration almost leads to, I don't want to give up. So then they kind of build a stronger perseverance almost. And as they go, they end up changing something in their environment. Like, some people start to think, well, it's not that hard to kind of be persistent, which means like not give up. And so then they start to have friends who kind of follow the way they are and think, you know what, if there's something that's really difficult to understand, maybe we can take our time and slow down. It doesn't matter if, it takes us a little bit longer to learn something. As long as we learn it well, then we'll be okay. So think of this happening for this boy's entire life, and he becomes 70, his entire life. Like, he gets married, he has kids, and then he's 70 or 80 and he dies. Now think about the family that he had. So he has a family, he has a bunch of friends. So you can think of a big web, right? So this, like, one dad and one mom, and then they have this boy, or this, like, maybe he has several kids, or this couple has a lot of kids, they end up having a lot of kids, and then they all have families and they have friends. So it becomes like a really big bubble of friends and family that kind of get together and become acquainted with each other, and they start learning from each other. And some of the things that are very difficult to understand is that sometimes when we learn something for a specific period of time, even though it worked a long time ago, it doesn't really work very much in the future. So for example, if that baby became a grandfather, and he used to tell all these stories about his life to his grandkids or his kids, and he says, you know what, my life was so strange, like these weird things would happen. And so these kids would hear these stories and they're like, wow, and they almost want to wonder about life. Like, I wonder if I did that. But God says, no, the story that your grandfather is telling you, it was only actually applicable in his time. So now your job as kids is, you have to think of new ways. Just the way he was thinking of new ways, you also have to think of new ways to live in the world, and persevere and persist and try to get up again after you get knocked down, because, well, an idea didn't work and you're not allowed to give up. So now they understand the idea. It's not that the way your life was almost like kind of, wow, how did this all happen to you? And it helps you build faith in the universe. It's not the idea itself that maybe friends will just become your friends because they speak different languages and they help you learn a lot more things about the universe. Maybe right now your challenge is that you all speak the same language, but in spite of that, you all have to have different ideas. So you see how there's a little bit of subtlety that's different. And so now you have to think, oh, so my grandfather actually traveled a lot and he learned to make a lot of different friends with people who spoke a lot of different languages, and he learned that way about diversity. But for me, my challenge is different than my grandfather. I don't have to travel. We all speak the same language where we live, but we all think the same. So we all have to challenge ourselves to think in different ways and creative ways. And then from there, we can create new kinds of diversity. So let's say, for example, that not everybody wants to believe that. They want to say, like some kids say, yeah, yeah, we should do that, some of the grandkids. And then some of the other grandkids are like, no, we want the way the grandfather used to do it because we love those stories. So think of the movie El Canto. The movie there, the story is we have to save this certain kind of light, right? And if it cracks, or they call it like a kind of magic, and if it cracks, then they make it seem like it's a bad thing. But what the story that like this boy and his when he becomes a grandfather tells us is that sometimes these cracks are important because they actually help us think in new ways. But not everybody knows how to understand that, right? Because when we think of stories, we almost want to repeat them in our life. We want to say, like, I wonder if I do that, what's going to happen? And we almost want it to look exactly like the story that we read without thinking about, well, it doesn't have to. It's actually probably better if it becomes a little bit more creative and we problem solve new ways of being becoming diverse about the story. So that's kind of what ends up happening, is that you have these people who want to do something, these other people who don't want to, and then there comes the problem of conflict, where it's like, well, how do we solve this? I mean, it's the same parents originally, the same boy with like a few siblings maybe, and then they all want to say, we want to pass this tradition on in our family, but now it's, well, who's right, and how are we supposed to know? We want the legacy. Like, this is such an important story and we want it to continue through time because it makes us feel so good, and look what everybody can learn. So this becomes a really big challenge, and sometimes people actually become really, really angry to the point that they don't even talk to each other again, even though they used to be really close friends or used to be really close family. So then you think, what if they actually start fighting each other? Like, what if they actually get into a war? You can imagine how, like, a couple who wanted something that was like really important for their son, and then in the end, like, look what happened. Like, how did this, and why would God do that? So it's almost to say, because God is trying to create a lesson, is that life and death for God isn't the way humans think about it. It's almost like we have to, if we think of life and death as we don't die permanently, we don't live permanently, it's almost like a way of thinking of sleep and wake again. Like, if you go to sleep and you wake up and you're thinking of new ideas and you look forward to waking up, because like, I wonder what I can do today, what's going to be a problem that I have to overcome, and then if I can't think about it, I'll think about the problem before I go to sleep, and then hopefully my brain will think about how to solve it, and I'll have a dream about it, and I'll wake up and I'll work on it again. So it becomes a way of life that you want to live. Like, you're just looking for things to like to puzzle with. So if you think in that way, then you're already aligning with like spirits and angels in the world that want to do that too with you, right? Even if they are animals. Like, sometimes you'll find animals that come. I showed a video, like a little clip on Instagram, where just two pigeons, or they might have been mourning doves, that just came and kind of perched on my windowsill there. And it's really neat because sometimes when I talk out loud, like I mentioned in that clip, Solomon and Jesus, as though they're just spirits and they're kind of representations of God in some context in the Quran. And as I was mentioning their name, they flew away. So it's almost to say that's God. Like, he brings us inspiration that's really, really, really fast. And if you don't catch it, it's gone. So it's almost like that's the point, is that these moments in time are not meant to be permanent, to tell you that they're supposed to help you build ideas, and from that small idea you build another one and another one and another one. That way it is a very diverse way of thinking about everything. So you're not just thinking the only way to learn is to go to school, the only way to learn is to play in nature, the only way to learn is to build technology. You have to think about how all these pieces work together, and then you make a really diverse, like really big puzzle, like these jigsaws. And that becomes who your unique self is. And then you have a lot to learn with. People want to learn with you. You have a lot of ideas to exchange with each other. And it just becomes a really fun way to live. So if you think back to the story and you think back to what the prophet had to kind of go through with his battle, how are those two stories kind of similar? because that's basically his family that he had to almost fight, right? Because he's trying to escape and they're trying to stand in his way and say, no, you're not allowed to leave and we have to eliminate you because we don't like your ideas and we don't want them to spread. And in this case, it was the parents of this boy or this girl wanted him to do something good in the world. And then it turns out that, well, there's good and bad in it. And we don't know how to decide what's going to be good and what's going to be bad. So that's what we talk about with dogma, is that it's sometimes hard to know what remains in the world that's beneficial and what sort of needs to be revisited and revised and then almost trimmed a little bit and then renewed and then practiced and then tried again. So when you think about legacy and you think about tradition and you think about all these ideas that we want to keep, sometimes it really, especially if it's been a long time that you've been practicing it, like think 2000 years, it's really hard sometimes to think about letting these ideas go, because we've all been thinking about them and almost like maybe, I don't know, like think 95% of the world is thinking in this way. And now you're like, I would get in a lot of trouble if I thought of a new idea. But then think about the prophet. Like he was just one person and then he had like a few friends and then they started to kind of like, we'll just go and live on our own. We don't even have to spread these ideas. We just want to be left alone. And then for some reason, God says, no, it's time for us to change the way we think because civilization's building. We're able to build like with all of this new technology. We can, have rocket ships that go into space and let us see, like if you watch Google Earth, there's so many new ways of understanding how our mind can learn and how we can help humanity kind of develop in new ways and think in new ways. So it's almost to say that we can't really know how to judge people. And I struggle with this too, because sometimes I get really mad. Like I talked about how I kind of am having a hard time bridging a gap with some of the friends that I had in the past before I went to Carleton. So I feel like in my own life, there's almost like this civil war. Like we don't actually argue much. Like I just don't talk to them. So I feel like there's this gap, like this schism. And the way I thought about it in my kind of mind was, think of the Red Sea, right? So you have the Red Sea, if you think about it, kind of like between Egypt and Saudi Arabia or Arabia, right? And in Egypt, where Moses and the Pharaoh were like in antiquity, a long time ago, they all wanted to escape because he was being a very, very, very mean ruler. So what happened was when he was escaping, when Moses was escaping with his people, it was kind of the same thing as the prophet. They just wanted to leave. They're like, just leave us alone and we'll be fine. And then when they got to the ocean or to the sea, they're like, uh-oh, behind us is the Pharaoh and his army. Like we're pretty much dead. But then what happened was God actually opened the sea. So he just let it open and then they could just walk by. And then they got to Arabia, they got to the other side and it was fine. So then Pharaoh, they tried to follow through, but then God closed the water and they drowned. So the way I think about it is if you turn it, think about the people that were on this side of the water and this side of the water, right? What happened in the middle there? It seems like these are people who died, who maybe never had a chance to think about new ways of thinking because they just have this ruler. They're afraid for their life. They're like, if we don't listen as an army, are we going to get killed? Like, and sometimes if you're used to thinking a certain way, you don't even know how to think in a different way yet because you're just like, this is the ruler. We like how we live. We don't want to change how we live yet. So that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it right now, is that I have a new way of thinking. So maybe I am part of the people that drowned, of Pharaoh and his army. So it's really new to me to think of new ideas, but I don't have all the ideas that maybe Moses and the people that survived have, because they've been thinking about it through time and it's almost like this is just the way we breathe, like it's just second nature. And then there's some people on this side of the ocean and some people on this side of the sea rather, and who knows what's happening on that side. And then there's the people that actually drowned. So you already have almost like 4 different populations of people and the people that were left behind in the desert of Egypt. So if you think of things in that way, then you're almost glad for that almost basic diversity, in that God doesn't destroy an entire people, as it were. It's almost like he just says it, or like it's almost like time almost collides in a way that says, for this time, this group of people, the way they're thinking can work because we do need leaders in the world. But it doesn't have to be a leader that assumes that he doesn't have to listen to other people's ideas. So maybe that group needs to kind of sleep for a little bit, as it were. And then the people that survived can understand, well, what can we learn from that? Like, we're going to become leaders now on our own because we're free, but how do we rule? And so they have to trial and error and process of like thinking about, well, how do we treat each other now? And then there's the part of people that drown, for example, going near the bottom of Africa, right? So they're going, maybe traveling further south, and they're going to come upon new land. If we think of rebirth and people who, like water kind of washes up onto land, and then excuse me, from land we have plants, and then animals eat the plants, the humans eat the plants and the animals, and then we have new babies. So you think how this life cycle continues and how this diversity, almost God makes sure that it remains in the world. So to have somebody who says, kind of like what the Pharaoh was saying, that it's only one way of ruling and it has to be my way and I know the best because I've studied, for example, you can say, okay, sure, but it's only going to be limited for a very specific time with a specific group of people, and they're allowed to change their mind in a few years anyway. So in doing that, we always remember that when people have pioneering ideas or they're thinking of new ways of thinking that we might think is wrong and might get them in trouble with God or the universe or some way, it's better not to stop them or join them. Just let them be, because then at least you're safe with God. Like God says in one of the chapters, if you're in an argumentation and you can't really reach a conclusion or a solution, just let people go. Just say, okay, you have your way of seeing and understanding, and I have my way of seeing and understanding, and we don't have to practice the same thing. It doesn't even have to be you do my way one day and I do your way the other day, and then we change, right? You can do that, but you don't have to. So it almost allows, it's almost like a way of God emphasizing that your unique person and your unique mind is that important, that you have every right to defend it no matter what. And it's best to do it in a way that's non-violent. So I studied Gandhi for a little bit. Actually, one of my semesters, actually, one of the classes I took, the seminars at Carleton during my second semester, that was a lot of S's. We studied the life of Gandhi, and the first thing that the professor said was like, why study Gandhi? Like, he has probably several biographies, like stories about his life, and every person who narrates is going to have a different way of understanding his life. Like, who do we believe and why even bother? And it's a good question, because it almost talks about how, depending on who met him and what their job in the world was, they're going to have a different idea of who he was, who Gandhi was, based on what they learned from him. So, for example, if I'm somebody who is a president of a country and I meet Gandhi and he says to me, I don't like the way you're ruling your country, and I'm going to go in a protest. I'm not going to eat, and I'm going to encourage people to protest with me. And that is what he'd end up doing. It's called passive resistance, and where he doesn't want to cause a war, but he doesn't also want to support an idea that's maybe hurting people who are poor or who don't have a voice to stand up for themselves. So the president might be like, that is a good idea, but I don't know how to do it yet, because I have to almost convince all these other people that work with me in like political office, and then I have to help like the whole country understand like all these rich people, are they gonna agree? And then like it's a very long process. We make it think like it can happen overnight, but it actually is a very, very long process, and it takes time. So that president might think about writing about Gandhi in one way. Poor people might think about writing about him in another way. Rich people might think in another way. So that's why it's almost like it's good that we have a lot of different ways of thinking about the same historical figure, and why sometimes when you are studying historical narratives, it's good to pick, like for example, 2 or 3 different ways of looking at one historical character, and then pick another one, and then compare and contrast them, and then think about, so for example, if you want to think about passive resistance, right? So you might look at the prophet, you might look at Gandhi, and then see the 2 different ways that worked. Then you might think about how does a man become somebody in politics and have a family? So then you might I don't know if you want to look at Jesus, because he wasn't a political leader and he didn't have a family. But what we know of Jesus is that he was somebody who tried to create change. So if you're somebody who's like, I'm not really interested in having a family, but I do want to be in political office and I want to make change in a peaceful way. So that might be somebody that you want to study, right? So understanding how all these different ideas work together won't want you to assume that there's one correct way. Sometimes people say, all these religions exist, they can't all be true. And all of them seem to say that they have the right truth. So it's like, none of that makes sense. And that's why it's a jigsaw puzzle. You can't have a jigsaw puzzle that's made on one piece, right? It's not really a puzzle. It can be a picture and you divide it into a lot of pieces. And then you understand why parts of it have to almost complete other parts. And if it's something that you develop through time, like a painting, think about your painting. If you started a painting one day and then you took a break for a week and then you built or you painted another part of it. So your actual painting is developing through time. So if you think of your scripture that you read from, for example, the Hindu scriptures like thousands of years ago to the Quran, which was only 1400 years ago, and you think of this massive canvas, and then you decide, I'm going to take a picture of this and maybe take it to the printing office or whatever store can print in like a poster form. I'm going to make it into a jigsaw. It almost helps you remember like an applied variation of what the world and what time and destiny can look like. So this is just something to build on one of the videos of holistic learning and why different learning styles help us in different ways. Like sometimes visual learning is very important. Sometimes applied learning, like watching something and then hearing about it and then thinking about it. And then you have to find like a way of remembering it visually, right? So if I talked about the flame in your heart as being faith. So maybe if your grandfather told you that story, you almost have that faith light up in your heart, and that's just like one flame, and you almost want to practice the exact same thing. But then you have this inspiration that, well, even though I have to find what works for my unique self, because now I'm like, I don't know, 40 years after my dad was born, right? And he's already 70. So there's already a 30-year gap. We're not going to have the same scenario or the same context. So now my flame is going to be kind of close, but I have to build my own idea too with what he told me. So having these ideas through time is almost like trying to capitalize on those moments of reverence and witnessing that I talked about, where we experience them for like little fleeting moments, but they don't last, and we want to capitalize on them and make them last so that we can remind ourselves whenever we have these moments of really deep confusion or distress about like, I'm having a really hard time with the world right now, nothing's making sense, and even the projects I'm starting, nothing works out, and I'm and you almost want to scream. And sometimes it's okay, just vent your frustration. But then remember that if you're patient afterwards, or even before you get to that point, and you think about, well, there must be a reason, and I have to figure out what that is, then your faith will continue to kind of glow like that, and you'll continue to have friends who want to help you, and the universe will help you, and of course God will be there to kind of support you in ways that you never expected would help you.